Hi, everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and Here We Are is a weekly show. We have folks from the community coming on and talking about who they are, what they do, how they got here. Today, we are very happy to have with us Dede Cummings. Dede is a poet, a writer, a book designer, and a publisher. She's been awarded grants and fellowships, and her writing has been published in many literary magazines. Trained as a letterpress printer, Dede brings the old school hot metal experience to her innovative book design. She founded the Green Writers Press Publishing Company in 2014. Dede, it is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Wendy.
Yes, nice to have you on the show. And you know, at the center of most everything that you do is the word or the book. You know, looking through all of the different activities that you've done, was when you were growing up, was that part of your family culture, part of reading and writing and all of that?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and in the summer we would go to a place called Matunic, which is, you know, that's where my soul is partly, and also Vermont. But Matunic is, that was land formerly belonging to the Narragansetts, the southern, you know, Algonquin people, the Wampanoag, that land down there. Matunic actually means to look out from or look out. And it was a summer encampment for the native peoples. And just a, you know, a privilege to be able to go there. And, you know, I love that area so, so much. And in the summers, my parents had a little art gallery. They ran it together. And I remember my father had me like designing the postcards they would, I was like 10, you know, but I loved design, you know, and words and images for me, that was kind of the way that I was able to express myself. You know, I definitely had some learning challenges in school, and I went to Catholic school almost through 12th grade. The Sacred Heart shut down when I was in 10th grade. And so I went to another school, but, you know, I had a lot of the Catholic school background. Yeah. And I remember I won a diocese contest for a poster design when I was in 6th grade. And it was so funny because I got recognition and I was able to express an idea. And all the nuns were excited because I was kind of a troublemaker in school. They were like, wow, Dede. So I used words and images throughout my childhood. Yeah. And, you know, my parents had the art gallery, and, you know, my teachers really encouraged my writing, especially my poetry early on, 7th, 8th grade,
That's really wonderful. And Matunic is by the ocean.
Yes.
Just to clarify that. And so that having that the influence of place and nature too was a big part.
Very much so. I was constantly out in the woods and at the beach, and also it was a place of almost sanctuary or refuge for me because it was pretty chaotic in our home with 5 sisters. Well, I have 4 sisters, 5 girls. We're all about a year apart. And sometimes I remember in Providence, which was obviously more urban, but I would escape to the backyard and climb up on the garage roof and just sit there with the tree branches, have some solitude.
Yeah.
And I always wrote in journals, locked little journals. And then I kept copious, you know, amounts of journals throughout high school and into college. And in, you know, I still write every day. Just
do you really?
Yeah, just journal stuff, you know, like what I'm doing, how I'm feeling, what the weather's like. I don't know. I didn't write daily when my children were young. So I really almost took like a 20-year hiatus from all kinds of writing, just raising the kids and being involved in the community in Brattleboro. That was much more, that was a different time for me.
But you started really young, so it got on your bones, both design and reading and writing.
It did. You know, my first poem was published, I think I was in 9th grade, it's funny because it was a terrible poem, but it was in the school literary magazine. But I remember the opening line, darkness came and the children deserted the park.
You know, it's a great opening for one of these new dystopian novels, right?
Yeah, there you go. But I
Yeah.
remember my mother, she died a year ago, and she was a ready audience for me always.
Oh, nice.
I would say, I've got a poem, and she'd say, read it to me. And we'd sit down in the kitchen, and I'd read it to her. And so,
That's a great influence to have that kind of support that at that age is really great.
I did. Yeah. And her sister-in-law, Nancy Bush Ellis, was also a real supporter of my writing. So I had it was great that my aunt, Nancy, she just died of COVID, January 10th. And, but she could quote whole sonnets of Shakespeare. These really smart, college educated older women who I think both my mom and my aunt Nancy wanted to get into publishing. They were writers. And my aunt Jean was a copy girl, they called them, for the New Yorker.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So that was always,
So you've got a lot in your family, and you ended up going to Middlebury. Yeah. And was there the strength of their writing program? Was that part of the appeal?
Yes, it's interesting. I was also really interested in their art program. I did a lot of art history. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but and German, my German was very good. I spent a gap year now we call it, but I spent a year not knowing what I was going to do with my life or go to college even, but I went to Europe for a year by myself and I ended up living in Vienna. So my German was pretty good when I got to Middlebury. So I was doing like comp lit, German English, but then the German just became too hard for me.
Yeah.
Reading Thomas Mann in German.
Oh God, it's hard enough in English, right? He is not a piece of cake.
But I just loved the English department at Middlebury. And in hindsight, there were no women. There was one tenured woman professor when I was in college. I was there from 76 till 79. And, we hardly read, it was, the white male canon.
That's amazing, isn't it?
We did a token, one Virginia Woolf and Jane Austen.
There have been huge changes, even though sometimes it seems like molasses. There have been huge changes. And you were also, you also went to Breadloaf Writers Conference.
Yeah, I was really fortunate because my poetry professor, Robert Pack, really encouraged me. And I just love him. He lives out in Montana. And he was a really great, I had wonderful professors. And I also had a great sociology professor, Peggy Nelson, who kind of taught me about feminism. But Robert Pack, I got a summer an undergraduate fellowship at Breadloaf, and I was 21 years old. And I didn't realize it was a very heady experience to be hanging out with John Gardner, Mark Strand, Toni Morrison. I was a waiter, so I would pour her tea for her every morning. I had her table. And people didn't, John Irving was there. No one had ever heard of him.
Right. Yes.
So it was really, but I definitely had the writing bug. I mean, I thought, because I got to be part of the workshop, my professor was Marvin Bell from the University of Iowa. And I felt really humbled to be there and totally insecure and young and naive, but also in awe of being a waiter at Breadloaf and being an undergraduate. So that was a great experience. Yeah. And then senior year, all I did was write poetry. My senior thesis was all poetry. After, college, I lived in Seattle for a while. Then I moved to Boston to get into publishing. So I interned at David R. Godine, a very prestigious art house and wonderful publisher. I think I may have been their very first intern. And now you can't get, it's really hard to get an internship there, but they needed help. And then I went from Godine. The internship helped me get a real job, a paying job, because I had like 3 jobs. I worked in a bookstore in Harvard Square called Wordsworth. I
remember that one. Yeah.
I made like $2 an hour. And I was always a waiter, a server, But I went from Godine to Little Brown, and then Little Brown, for 5 years. And then I moved to Brattleboro. So it was a really interesting sort of trajectory. I came to Brattleboro and then applied to this Bennington Writers Workshop the summer after I moved here. And I had, by then, no, a couple of summers later, and I had a couple of kids, and it was great. My husband was a teacher, so we shared childcare responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And I was able to drive over to Bennington and study with Hayden Carruth, who was amazing. He was a great teacher. And, he was sort of the unofficial poet laureate of Vermont.
Yeah.
He lived over in New York State, but he was really a Vermonter, and very old school. We read Ars Poetica, very, a great teacher for me. And one thing he told me to always find my voice and use my voice in writing. He said, don't be shy about that. Don't try to cover your voice with stylistic things, or, let yourself get sort of stuck.
Right.
Or insecure. And that really stayed with me.
Yeah, it's probably the best and maybe the only advice you really need, right, as a writer?
Yeah, and you can't really teach voice. It's something that you have, but you really have to almost find it within yourself. And after I moved to Brattleboro, I just loved this community. And when I came here, I was just on a visit. I was working at Little Brown and Company, and they sent me up to the book press. So I'm guessing it was early 1986. And I felt so grown up. I was probably 26 at that point, or 27. And I fell in love with Brattleboro. And I went to the book press, and, I got a tour of the plant. I met all the press operators, and we talked letterpress, of course, because I had done that in Seattle and at David R. Godine in Boston. Yes. And then I called my husband from a phone booth back then, the old days. And I said, Steve, there's this great town. I think we can move here and raise our family. Because we had like a 1-year-old in this 400 square foot apartment in the attic of this old house in Cambridge.
Yeah.
Didn't really, we had to walk through the landlady's house to get to the apartment.
Yeah.
So our dream was to, move someplace. And Brattleboro was a very welcoming town. Even back then, it was just very old school, and, had a really great mix of people, the older hippies, the back to the land. Right. I was so attracted to that.
That's right.
And good schools.
Yeah, good public schools, yes.
Very good public schools.
Well. That's great. Where was that phone booth?
Where I called Steve. Oh my God, what a great one. I really think it was on Main Street.
I was just trying to think, where did we have a phone booth?
Because
you might be right.
I remember it was on the other side of the street, because across the way was the Toucan and the Crow.
Llama.
I remember saying, wow, this place is so cool. And I do think Hemmelman's, I know you've had Jeffrey Hemmelman on your show.
Yes.
I think the bakery was on Elliott Street. And I just thought, I found my place. And then these are people.
You ended up moving up here. And at that time what were you doing when you moved to Brattleboro?
Well, I didn't want to move to a new city without having a job. We money was really tight. And my husband had been accepted at the University of Massachusetts to get his teaching degree. So I needed a job. I, had to be the breadwinner. And at Little Brown, back then I had a pretty comfortable job with benefits and everything. So I was so lucky, because I wrote to Irving Perkins Associates in Brattleboro and talked my way into a job. I said, I'm moving. I really want to move to Brattleboro. And I love the work, as the design work they were doing, custom design work right here in Brattleboro. That was kind of an outgrowth of the book press. I mean, Irv was a terrific designer. He designed, like, for example, he did Simon & Schuster books, and his little company was growing, and they were offering typesetting. So it was right up my alley, because I love setting type. Goes back to my letterpress work. For example, Irving Perkins, they did all the President's Men.
Really?
And, sure. I mean, we had some great, clients. New York publishers would send their work to Brattleboro. And then they became page setters. And I was there from 86 until 91. And then in 1992, I started DC Design, because at that point, I had 3 kids and I wanted to work from home
Yeah.
and be with my kids, you
Right.
know. And
Right.
so
Right.
it was a
Right.
good time to start that type of business because the computers, the internet,
Just
things
starting
were
up. Yes.
available.
Just
Yeah. But
starting up. You know, one other thing too, Dede, I believe that when you were at Little Brown, was that when you were working on Mary Oliver's books?
oh yeah, it was so like I worked when I was at Little Brown, you know, Norman Mailer came into my office once. You know, it was kind of a crazy time, the
Yeah.
80s. Back then, the Atlantic Monthly Press was owned by Little Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And a new book came in and it was called American Primitive by Mary Oliver, which went on to win the Pulitzer Prize.
Right.
And I'm not going to take credit for designing it because Susan Windheim, my boss, designed it, but I kind of did the specs and the formatting and worked very closely on it. And then I got to do the next book by Mary Oliver. And then she really weirdly and fortuitously for me connected with me because I was a former typographer, letterpress printer, and I could talk about the differences in X height of the lowercase letters. And
Yes.
she loved my typeface choice, Perpetua, designed by Eric Gill, you know, so I knew the lineage. And we both agreed that the lowercase italic in the point size was a tad small for Mary's taste. So I always made it a point size larger. And she ended up sort of, by then when I started freelancing in 92, Mary took me to Beacon Press, kind of took me along as a freelancer, and she signed a contract with them and she said, I want Dede to work on my book. And they said, great, because they were using freelancers back then.
What a great story.
I think I did 6 of her books.
Wow. Congratulations. That's really a kudo. You know, it's wonderful to have started with her at such a young age for you, but also in her publishing career.
I started working for Shambhala Publications in Boston. I spent 92, 2002, almost 25 years working for Shambhala. And, you know, I did tons of books. I did Pema Chodron books. I did a book by Ursula Le Guin, which was pretty exciting. And you know, I did those little books that they publish, you know, like Walden, copyright free, you know, I created those, and it was just really a fun time.
Going on to Green Writers Press and the publishing company, which happened a bit after this in 2014. What was it that inspired you to have your own publishing company?
It was sort of the next move after having my own design company, which I still have. I mean, I still work for other publishers. Tupelo Press is, you know, a big client of mine. I love them. They're in North Adams, Mass. But then I started my publishing company thinking, oh, it'll be sort of a side project. And who knew, but, you know, Vermonter and dear friend, the late Howard Frank Mosier, took such an interest in this. And his desire was to keep the small bookstores and the independent publishers going strong into the future, as opposed to having Amazon dictate what we read. And, you know, nothing, you know, Amazon, it's a great resource. It's like Wikipedia, but, you know, the independent voices in publishing, I really wanted to do that. And also because of the climate crisis that we are facing, I was trying to think of what I could do with my skill set, like how can I make a difference? So then I created this environmental theme and mission.
Yes. And that is your mission, to be a local board publisher.
The local board.
I love that. You know, going to your writing and the books that you've had published over the course of these years. I know that you have a new book of poetry out that came out, I think, last year, called Meeting Place.
A year ago.
And, you know, and I guess I also see how I think that there are some charmed things, you know, that have happened to you, like working with Mary Oliver, having all these wonderful mentors, having your 2 books of poetry that have blurbs by Billy Collins.
Yeah, he's been a mentor to me. I'm so lucky. And Chard Denord, the former Vermont State Poet Laureate, he's just amazing. Here's the new one.
The Meeting Place. That's right.
Yep.
Yes, we'll have the information at the end of the show too of how people can get hold of these books.
Hmm.
And I think that, one thing that really strikes me is that a lot of all of what you do is about your expression, whether it's your own writing or I know that you worked as a book agent for many authors over the years. You've been a VPR commentator. You've done the written word for the Commons and for the Vermont Digger, as well as some other outlets. So I wonder if you could just say a word or two about. It's almost like I see it almost as sort of what you're seeking. Is ways of finding your expression, ways of places where you can express yourself.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure I know where or how, but I do know this, that and especially during the pandemic, I walk every day, hike. It clears my head. And because I spend a lot of time on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And so my relationship with the natural world is really an important daily excursion for me, and sort of like a meditation,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I think that writing comes to me in sort of spurts. It's not a steady thing. And sometimes it's just, I have to keep doing it though, in order to just keep the channels open.
Yeah.
And, I did a workshop in Brattleboro right on Main Street when Suzanne Kingsbury lived here. And
Yeah.
every Tuesday night I would go to this writing salon. And that was wonderful. She really helped open up opened me up as a person to my voice, my writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I really started reaching out and using my writing to express my opinion and to get back into writing poetry, which I had loved in college and I had put aside to raise my family, make a living, work hard. I was very involved in the Brattleboro community. I was on the Brattleboro Museum board and those kinds of things. But when I started doing the salon in Brattleboro, I met all these other writers, Ross Thurber, Diana Whitney, Michael Fleming. This is just Lori Fichter from Putney. We had so much fun.
Yes.
And they loved they'd say, more, So I think that I would really encourage writers to kind of form that kind of community. But I've always felt this need to use my voice, whether it's for social justice or environmental justice. I'm not afraid I don't really have writer's block. And, my ego, I remember one of my first pieces in Vermont Digger, the comments were awful. And my daughter, who's a journalist, she said, "Don't read the comments, Mom."
Right.
They were terrible.
That's good advice. Yeah.
I went to the climate march and I thought, oh, this is so exciting. And people were like, yeah. You charged your phone at a hotel along the way at the climate march. You were using electricity. What a hypocrite.
Oh.
I'm like, oh, sorry. But I think I felt this need to reach out to people, whether it's through publishing their books and reaching an audience or my own books. Like I love being a publisher and working with an author. Or a publisher. When I work with Tupelo Press, I really feel they give me a lot of autonomy, and I love working with David and he's the art director, and we just have fun, and I give it a look, and I bring the words out. I create like a world around a specific title. Right. Yeah. And I've as a book designer, I knew how to do that. So when I became a publisher, I thought, I can do this, but it's a lot more work. And it grew, the Green Writers Press grew very fast.
Yes.
Who knew?
And you've had some wonderful authors.
Oh, we're so lucky. We're doing, yes, right now I'm set to publish at the end of April, Governor Madeline Cunan's her debut poetry book.
That's so exciting.
It's gorgeous. I did work with Robin MacArthur early on, and she edited contemporary Vermont fiction for Green Writers Press, and Robin's amazing. I mean,
she's taken off. Yeah. Yeah, it's really exciting to see all of these young authors. Of course, they're not as young as they used to be, much like us, but they are getting. Meg Little Riley has had I think 3 books published now.
And local author Anne Braden, I'm so proud of
Anne
her.
Braden is another one. Yes,
She's definitely younger.
yes,
I
yes.
love, and I work with Bennington College. Well, this year I had 10 interns, and I do this 6-week program for them. And people say, "Oh, isn't that a lot of work?" And I say, "No, these young people are running the press for me. They're amazing, and
Yeah.
they're so invested." I do love teaching, and of course I talk to them all about letterpress and
Yes.
typography and the integrity that's so important. But I think it's really important to teach younger people this old school method
Yeah,
because
and
it's just part of a heritage almost.
it's part of the heritage, and I think too, because I did a little letterpress when I was younger as well, nothing like what you've done, but there's something about that kinesthetic piece where you're setting the lead, you are
It's
using,
beautiful.
like in computer programs, it talks about leading and kerning,
It does.
but we know what they were back then,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
just to have that to have that hands-on experience with
Mhm.
letters, with words, with
Yeah.
creating designed paragraphs.
I did go to the Vermont Studio Center, which is up in
Mhm.
Johnson, Vermont. It's an amazing place. It's the oldest residential artist program in the United States.
Mm.
Who knew? And I spent almost a month there, and that was in 2016.
Mhm.
And my first book emerged. I remember thinking, "Oh my God, here I am!" And I had my little studio.
Yeah.
And then you have a place they do. You can do your laundry, and they feed you 3 meals, so you don't have to worry about
Right.
cooking. And
Yeah.
there are scholarships. I got a fellowship there, and I had to work in the kitchen,
Uh-huh. Yep.
loading the dishes, which I loved. I worked with a young poet,
Uh-huh.
and we became buddies.
Yes,
So
so much of
that
it.
gave me the space to write.
That's right. And so much I think of what you've done also is about building relationships with obviously authors, but also, being in a workshop or teaching or, talking about letterpress, all of that. And so much of it also, Dede, the advice that Hayden Carruth gave you of finding your own voice. Have found it in so many different avenues and
And I
so many
have
different
great editors, I mean, Jeff Potter is terrific. And,
yes.
the team, Betty Smith at Vermont Public Radio, she
Uh-huh.
taught me so much. One of the big things, because I'm very verbose, as you can imagine, as you know, and Betty Smith said 400 words. So
Right.
I can crank out 1,500 words very quickly, but then you
Yeah,
have to edit it down and
that's
tighten
right.
it up. And
Yeah, yeah,
so it really helps in poetry too, because
that's
each
right.
word carries weight.
That's right.
And so I
Yeah.
think even though I'm an older poet, I feel like I'm still learning and
Oh, yeah.
growing as a writer, and I'm
Yeah.
open to that.
Well,
So,
I'm glad you are. Thank you so much.
ah, you're
Thanks so
welcome.
much for being on the show. We could go on a bit.
It's
We
been
could go on a bit.
really an
I know.
honor to be on your show, which I watch regularly. And
Oh, good. Well, that's great.
so
Well,
thank you for having me.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Dede.
Ciao.
And thanks to all of you out there in the audience for being with us again today. Tune in again. We'll be here next week with someone new. You can always see Here We Are, Brattleboro's Community Talk Show. We stream all of our shows. They're all available. You can go to the BCTV site. And we hope to see you again next week. Thank you.